Welcome, and thank you for joining us today for our Online College Students 2020 webinar presented by Wiley Education Services and Aslanian Market Research, a division of Education Dynamics. My name is Shandy Thompson, and I'm the Corporate Brand Manager at Wiley Education Services. Before we get started today, I just want to review a few housekeeping items. First, we welcome all your questions and comments. Please type your questions and comments into the Q&A pane. And be sure to send your messages to all panelists, not just to the hosts or presenters, so we make sure that they'll get answered. A moderator will respond to questions in the Q&A pane throughout the presentation, and our presenters will also take some time today in the presentation to answer your questions. We encourage all attendees to follow us on Twitter at Wiley Ed Services and continue the conversation using hashtag #OCSReport2020. A recording of today's presentation will be sent to all attendees. And with that, I would like to introduce today's presenters. Moderating today's discussion is Andrew J. Magda, Market Research Manager at Wiley Education Services, where he has served the market research team for the past 8 years. He has aided in the creation or co-authored 8 of the past 9 online college students report. David Kapranos is the Director of Market Strategy and Research at Wiley Education Services, where his team conducts extensive research to identify demand, market opportunities, and potential challenges to help universities determine the viability of educational programs in the online market and stay ahead of industry and market trends. Carol Aslanian is the President and Founder of Aslanian Market Research, a division of Education Dynamics. Carol is a national authority on adult and post-traditional higher education, and her market research studies have helped hundreds of colleges and educational consortia expand their programs to meet the educational needs of working adults through campus-based, blended, and online programs. And with that, I will turn our presentation over to Andrew.
Thank you, and welcome to all you who are able to join us today for our 9th annual tradition of sharing the results of our survey of online college students. So today we're going to review the key findings from this 2020 version of the survey. We are going to go over some recommendations based upon these key findings and then take some time towards the end to answer the questions that you may have about the report and about just general trends in the online education market that we'll be able to answer for you. As Shandy said, I will be serving as the moderator today, so please type all your questions in the Q&A pane, and I'll try to answer those directly to you or even stop Carol and David at various points to get their insights around some pressing questions. And then we'll also, as I said, have some time later on to specifically go over those questions. And now I'll just turn it over to David, and we'll get started with some of our key findings.
Yeah, thanks for that, Andrew. And I like that you use the word tradition there. It speaks to the length of time this report has been in market. So we've done this now for the 9th time. We've asked questions of something like 1,500 plus students every year for more than, over the last 8 or 9 years to produce this document, which gets downloaded, well over 1,000 times each year and regularly gets picked up in different media. And really has served as the gold standard when it comes to understanding, the different trends related to online learning in the marketplace. So today we're going to discuss some of the insights, some questions that we've asked, kind of year over year and gotten new information about, and then also some new questions and new insights that we've gotten as well. So looking forward to going through the report with you guys. So Carol, let's go ahead to the next slide.
Okay. Waiting for it to come up. Do you all have it up? I don't. Okay, here we go. Methodology. Well, for the 9th year, we've done this, and we've tried to do it systematically so the results are not tainted by different procedures. So each year, we go out to 1,500 students, and if you know Aslanian Market Research, we bend over backwards to study demand and not need, and we have worked with a provider of those surveys who understands that we're not asking for what people think or wish or might want to do, but actually what they have done in the past, currently doing, or plan to do in the near future, and we label that as demand. So we have 15 demanders in this study as we have in the past studies, and that is they had to have studied full-time, not full-time, but they had to have participated in a fully online post-secondary degree or certificate or licensure programs. So our surveyors understand that the population they're trying to get data from have to be involved in fully online programs. And to do that, we took 3 categories of respondents: recent graduates, and that is you were enrolled in a fully online program in the past 3 years or fewer. So you can imagine we can ask them what they did, how they did it, where they went, and so on and so forth. The next eligible population were those who are currently enrolled in an online program, and we'd ask them a similar set of questions. And finally, we go after a little bit of the future in terms of those who have firm, I mean firm, plans to enroll in the next year. That is, we'll take them into the survey if they can tell us what they want to study, where they want to study, and so forth, so they have a definition of their plans. All the respondents in our surveys have to be 18 years of older and have had a high school degree or its equivalent. Next. There are a whole range of demographics, and so certainly we can't bring them all to you today, but please get that full report and you'll see them all. One question that we're also asked quite a bit is the number of children these people have under the age of 18, because we know that occupies a lot of time and resources, finances, and so forth. So I thought you'd be interested in this question. And where we can, we'll show you the divisions between undergraduate and graduates, and the report does that throughout so that those of you who are interested in one sector or the other can find your data. But it's interesting to us that these online students, 64%, 2/3 of them have no children, okay? So they're either older or they're older participants, so their children are beyond that age, or they have very, very young children. So we think it's important for you to understand what their home responsibilities are. But it's interesting to note, 2/3 have no children. Okay, next. Are you the first in your family to attend college? And 2/3 or better say no. So they do have a history of college goingness at both, and it's equal if you can see that, at 67 and 68% say no. I'm not the first, so that's both at the undergraduate and graduate level. So that's significant to know. They've had a history of college going in their family. Next. Well, no news to many of you, as I've worked with many of you in the past. 60% of all the population, undergraduate and graduate, are working full-time, okay? 16% are not working full-time, they're in part-time positions, and the remaining are either retirees who want to go on for an undergraduate or graduate degree for some personal reason or avocational interest. But it's important to know that 3/4 of your population are in the work field, and most of them are working full-time. So that, you know, that's the big message about efficiency and getting this over with as quickly as I can, and so on and so forth. Next. Half are looking to start a new career, okay? And look at that, we gave them what, 6, 7, 8 reasons to start a new career to earn more money. 20% of the graduates and 28% of the undergraduates, but in total, 1 out of 4 of your online seekers want to start a new career, really for the motive of making more money. And you'll see this trend of being interested in salary increases and promotions to get more income very prevalent throughout the data that we'll present you. So it's a new career, but primarily to earn more money. And second most important is to start a new career that is common with their interests. So what this means to you is get your marketing people in here and talk to them about messaging and what your school institution can do to help these people achieve those 2 primary goals. I think we can move on. And
yeah, I'll jump in here, Carol. So, you know, One of the things that was really important for us to look at is we asked the students this question where when you're deciding to go back to school, what was most important to you? And it's interesting to see that about 3/4 of them say the school and the format before the subject. I think traditionally when we think about students coming out of high school, maybe in their junior senior year, they're thinking about where they want to go to school. They're really interested in either the brand or the place, right? I really want to go to NYU, or I really want to go to school in New York. Whereas the online market, a little bit more further in their career, maybe a little bit more practical, a little bit more career centric, like Carol just mentioned. They're a lot more focused on the subject that they're going to be studying, more so than they are the actual school. So if we go to the next slide, we continue this story a little bit. Let's go to the next slide. And what we find is we ask the students, if the school you were looking at, if that program wasn't available online, what would you do? And over half the students tell us, I'm going to go somewhere else. So thinking about your strategies, you're developing your online portfolio and thinking about the different programs that you offer, you have to be aware that if you're not offering the right program for these students, they're going to look elsewhere. Beyond that, we see that a lot of students are also telling us that they might enroll in a different program online at the same school if they've really got that strong affinity, but that totals up to about 3/4 of folks saying that they would move on if they don't have the program that they're looking for, or if you rather don't have the program they're looking for.
And
so ultimately,
yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, what I was going to say is ultimately it's really important to understand that you've got to offer the right mix of programs for the students. And it's important to note that this isn't just about the degree specifically, but more and more it's becoming about the concentration that's offered within it, right? Or the actual classes that are being taken, the different program features that are within the program. So it's really making sure that you've got, for example, maybe not just an MBA, but an MBA with a healthcare administration program concentration. Maybe it's a data analytics concentration. If they don't see that program available, many of your students are going to go and find another competitor, especially with the ease of online going, to school, the next state over, the next city over is really easy. So all this culminates in the next slide. If we can go to the next slide. Into our first recommendation. Essentially, the idea is to offer a strategically developed portfolio of online programs. And what we mean by that is thinking about your online strategy, to Carol's point, one that orients towards where students are actually showing interest, where that demand is, but also understanding that as you bring in those potential students on, a series of keywords, a series of concepts, you're really going to have to make sure that you have the right fit for them. So you might bring folks in on data analysis, but if you don't have the healthcare administration concentration, or whatever it is that they're looking for in the market today, they may end up going somewhere else. Carol, did you have something to add at this slide?
I was going to go back to that the slide before, and just to point out how important online is, because if you look at the turquoise and the purple, it has the word online. So, they are looking for online when they're looking for online. In other words, it's important to understand what the demand is, but to offer it online, because if you add up the two percentages, the word online is very important.
That's absolutely.
Okay.
So, thank you, Carol and David, for that. I just wanted to take a moment here to talk about the next set of findings that you two will go over with the audience. And this kind of centers around the traditional iron triangle, the balancing of price, reputation, and speed. It's not unique to higher education. We see it in many different businesses and industries, dealing with consumers or students, that they're looking for speed to the degree, they're looking for getting it from a reputable source. So they are looking around quality, but also they're very price sensitive. And as we've conducted the survey over the last 9 years, reputation was the number one issue that students were looking at, a number one factor that when considering an online program for the first 2 years of the survey in 2012 and 2013. But price started to really come up that chain, and that's what we've been seeing over the last 7 or so years, is affordability, that tuition and fees being the number one factor that we're looking at, followed by reputation and speed. So these next few findings, I think, David, you'll start to cover, this theory that we've been seeing over the last few years of the survey, this balancing act that institutions have to have in order to attract these online college students.
Yeah, thanks for that, Andrew. And I think it's really interesting to note some of these core concepts remain so consistent year over year. Really, just kind of speaks to the truth of that it's sort of the buying behavior that folks have out there. If we can go to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about price, but for us, we talk about it in the context of affordability for students. Obviously, tuition and sort of the time to degree and a number of other factors flow through that. So I think a lot of us will really zoom in on something like a cost per credit hour, but the reality is if your program maybe is a little bit more on the cost per credit hour, but maybe is fewer credit hours to complete, you can be less expensive than other programs out there. I think the balancing act too for us to think about is what about the return on investment? And so sort of what's that net present value of the degree as well is something that's important to consider. And as we think about affordability, you got to kind of calculate reputation in there too, right? And really get to a value story about the mix of affordability versus your sort of reputation in the market and what ends up being most appropriate for your school is really important. If we go to the next slide, we wanted to think through some of the different ways that affordability can be managed, right? So again, it's not all about the cost per credit hour. There's a lot of other things to look at. And so we had about 25% of our students told us that one of the things that was most important to them was they were seeking the quickest path to their degree, right? We see that out there. If you look at, for example, the MBA market, the average number of credits has been declining over the last few years. We're starting to see a lot more of these 30-hour programs in the market become more and more common. As an example, you see a lot of schools saying, we've got a 20-month MBA now, an 18-month MBA, and even some really innovative ones out there that have a year-long MBA that are trying to become quicker and quicker. Another way that you can be affordable, or you can kind of, hack that affordability equation is your transfer credit policy. And so, we asked undergrad students how much prior credit they had as they were thinking about completing their bachelor's degree, and 87% of them said, I've already got credits that I've earned, right? And what we're finding is that, there are certain institutions that have really restrictive transfer credit policies. And so for some students, that might end up artificially inflating the number of total credits that they have to earn in a way that sort of ends up being a more expensive type of degree for them overall. One of the last things that's here in the hot pink on this graphic, and I think it's a really interesting one, is that the students are really moved by really small scholarships. And so this gets into sort of buying behavior and some of the cognitive science behind how people tend to look at things, but we're really surprised to see that students report, even with a small amount of a scholarship, something like a book scholarship, $500, $1,000, that a lot of people could sway their opinion about a program, even if the net cost is larger.
Right.
It's something that can really signal to them that they've won something, they've earned something. It's something that can help move their decision. We've seen this play out with a lot of our partners. But like I said, all these things.
David, I just wanted to interject there and reinforce
Sure.
what you're saying on that scholarships. In our current regional surveys, we put up the sign for the local college we were working with, $500 annual scholarships, $500. Would that make a difference? It was a huge success. And I think it's that these people can go back to their mothers, fathers, wives, husbands, and say, look, that school really wants me. I could get a $500 scholarship.
Sure.
And it makes a big difference, particularly now when so many are straining to pull the dollars together to support their education. So we have to give a little bit more. And when administrators say to me, but Carol, I can't get my supervisor to agree about giving out any more money. And I say, you probably could make it back in volume. If you lower your price, you could make it back in volume because it's such an important variable in making a decision on the part of these students.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great point, Carol. We had 50, something like 50% of students told us affordability was their top concern, but we thought it was really important to match that with this other stat that 2/3 of people told us they're willing to pay a little bit more for a better ROI. So obviously, cost is important, and I feel like we're kind of hammering that point here a little bit, yeah. But the reality is that it's a balancing act for students, and we're not really advocating for a race to the bottom. It's thinking about what are creative ways that we can really communicate that value to students and let them understand that our particular school is the best match for them in their career. Let's go to the next slide. One of the other points too to sort of reinforce this is that we asked students how do they feel about the return on their investment? So the students that went through programs, did the value exceed the cost of your degree? And we can see here really huge satisfaction numbers. And this is something that we see in a lot of our programs at Wiley Education Services too, is that you get here, 42% strongly agreeing the value exceeded the cost, 37% saying really only a fraction of students saying that they didn't think their degree was worth it. And so that's something that's really important for us to see, that these programs, these online programs, are definitely ones where students are still understanding that this has a real impact on their career trajectory and helps them achieve some of those goals that Carol mentioned earlier. Let's go to the next slide. So all of this culminates in our second recommendation here, where we really want to encourage communicating your value. And as Carol mentioned, sometimes that can be something as simple as these teaser scholarships. We see a lot in the market, maybe a trailblazer type of scholarship for a new struggling program. Sometimes that's a really great strategy. But generally speaking, over the long haul, it's really helping students understand this is an appropriately priced program. It's an investment in your future, and it's something that is manageable in terms of handling the tuition. We want to make sure that these students are set up for success in their career over the long haul. Was there anything you wanted to add here, Carol?
No, I think that sums it up well. Thank you.
Can I interject for a minute before we jump into the next one, guys?
Sure.
I just wanted to address the audience, just let them know if they do have any questions about anything we've covered thus far, to type them in that Q&A box for me, and I'll try to bring them up to Dave and Carol. But both of you, David and Carol, you've been talking a lot about scholarships. What has been your kind of professional experience with marketing to online students with something other than a scholarship, say like free textbooks or a free iPad or a free laptop? Are those as successful? Where would you kind of say that plays in terms of a scholarship versus something physical for the students?
Yeah, I'll tell you, I think the days of the free iPad with your degree might be a little bit behind us. I think that that was something that was pretty big 5-7 years ago. We had some partners that used that as a strategy, and I think like as those devices were kind of new and innovative and cutting edge, I think that something like that was really important. I remember years prior to that seeing programs that you get a laptop with your degree or something like that for incoming freshmen. They all get the same laptop, for example. I think nowadays some of the costs of these consumer technologies have gotten so low, and a lot of these people already have them in their home. So the idea of getting something that you maybe already have doesn't have the same amount of value that it would have. It's an interesting question too, because I think more and more with these mobile technologies, we're actually going to see, and this is a bit of a spoiler for the end of the presentation, is that a lot of these students are doing their work already on their cell phone. So the idea of doing an iPad or a laptop or something might be a little bit dated. That being said, online educational resources, I think there is a value there for a lot of students. It depends on the program though. Some folks really want to get out that highlighter and highlight their physiology textbook or that sort of thing. But then there's others that couldn't imagine reading a business strategy book with a physical copy. And so for some schools, those digital online educational resources are going to be a value add for the student. But again, it's sort of a proceed with caution, understand your audience.
Yeah, Andrew, my answer to your question is simply money talks. And I think it's more important now than ever before, because it resonates on all our surveys that, a reduced cost is highly, highly appealing. And I think David had it right on target when he said most of these other things we're offering are things they have or just not worth the same as the dollar.
Yeah, well said.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on. Let's talk a little about the importance of reputation. It came up earlier in our findings. And when we asked this population, what were the most important factors in the decision about where to enroll for an online program? Of course, you can see affordability. We were just mentioning that. So affordability comes out over and over again. And what I've seen in our recent surveys that it's even more true for graduate students than undergraduate. And maybe it's because the undergraduates have more channels of funding. So when you look at the report and you looked at the distinctions in the data between undergraduate and graduate, you'll see the pricing issue is much more prominent among the graduate students. But then again, it was mentioned earlier, reputation of the school or program. Now, what do we mean by that? Well, you'll see shortly that these people are close to where you're located. And so word of mouth is very important. It's important among the employers that they are working with friends, relatives. So how do you build your reputation? How do you say we stand out among all the rest in this 100-mile radius? And the major point is today, more than ever, is where are your graduates working? What positions do they get? How well do they do in the open marketplace? And it used to be a lot about the credentials of your faculty, but I think that's not half as important as, will this school's reputation help me get a good job or move on to get that increased salary that I want so much? And the other two, the academic credit, of course, is much more important to undergraduates. And the quickest past my degree is very interesting at the fourth level there, because I would think that come up higher, but there it is. So this gives you a good lay of the land in terms of where your marketing messages should fall. Next. Which of the statements is closest about tuition to how you made a major decision? And it's roughly the same for the school and program I chose has the best reputation, against emphasizing that point. And second, tuition for my preferred program is lowest. So there we go. Over and over again, cost is important. Plus, will this school get me the right position where I can make more money? That's what we hear over and over again. Next. This distance to campus is shrinking, ladies and gentlemen. As you know, we've been prolific in talking about they're only 100 miles from where you live. We kept saying that, and half of them in 2012 were within 50 miles of the campus. In 2014, it basically was the same, but when we got to 6 years later, 75% studied with a college within 50 miles or less for where they live. Phenomenal. So what does that mean? My goodness, it certainly conserves on your marketing dollars, because now you can let's just take 150, 200-mile radius. And that's where you concentrate your messages and your promotions and your billboards and whatever. And also it does something else. It tells you where your competition is. Your competition is closer than farther away. Okay? So number one, do the market analysis to find out what the market is demanding in your 100-mile radius. Where are they going? Who is your competition? What are they doing that you're not? What can you do that can better than them? Because this is called proximity. And this is a big gift to many of the colleges on listening to us today, because many of you are regional, local institutions, and your market is right behind the campus. Think hard about that and where you're spending your dollars. However, there's one exception, and that is if you have sort of a boutique or niche topic that is probably relevant to the nation, like we did a study on sustainability, master's degree or advanced degree, and there we went nationwide because we knew it was more than New England. But on the whole, marketing dollars within 100, 150 miles are best spent. Next.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point, Carol. Thinking more about that proximity element and the fact that these folks are pretty close to campus, it's unsurprising that a lot of them are actually going to visit your campus.
Right.
70% of students said, I've been to campus in the last 12 months. A lot of them are planning to come. We want to do a bit of a breakdown to understand what are those folks doing. Interestingly, about a quarter of them said that they were coming to see an instructor, and then another quarter said, I'm attending classroom sessions, maybe it's a lecture or seminar or something along those lines, and then a handful of them, unfortunately, solving an administrative issue. This is an interesting one for us because a lot of what we push for is giving these students a lot of support, and we understand that when you do get these online students, you're going to have to get a lot of services that are maybe different than you've traditionally offered. Most of these online students can't come and stand in line, in your registrar's office and things along those lines. We want to make sure that we have that infrastructure available for them where they can solve these problems remotely. That's something that's really critical. Interestingly, too, a lot of these folks end up using other student services, and then some obvious ones, maybe attending a sporting event, you coming and buying something from the bookstore. It's been interesting. I've heard a lot of anecdotes about online learners meeting up at campus for study group sessions. So like Carol mentioned, if half your students are coming from a 10 to 15 mile radius, that's essentially driving distance. And so for a group project or something like that, we might all meet up in the library as an example. Let's go on to the next slide.
Hey, David, could I just stop you on that?
Yeah, go ahead.
We just had a question come in. You're going over how they're coming to campus and they're meeting up in groups. How do you see this changing now with the present situation with COVID? Do you think students are still going to crave this campus activity, or how should we think about kind of supplementing this?
It's a great question. Anecdotally, I just was talking to a professor who said he saw, a group of his MBA students on campus, and they all had their masks on. They were, kind of sitting in the quad, talking to each other, maintaining that 6-foot distance. So it still is happening in pockets, but one would presume, obviously, we're going to get a lot less of that in the near future here. I think a lot of this is hopefully short term. One could imagine, there's not a lot of sporting events and some of these other things, so you can strike those off the list. But I still think we're likely to have students attend campus off and on. I will say one phenomenon that we've noticed, and even in this group we were talking about it earlier, is the sort of virtual kind of meeting, these Zoom sessions and things like that. I think a lot of us have gotten a lot more comfortable with our webcams over the last few months, and I think that a lot of that face-to-face interaction with instructors, some students and some instructors themselves might be a lot more likely to get that face-to-face interaction over virtual media. So it'd be interesting to see how that impacts, generally speaking, if people connect more through Zoom than they might have last year. Carol, any input on that?
Well, I'm thinking about it, and it could be that they don't have to visit the campus to get these services. For example,
Sure.
There could be appointments with instructors online. Classroom sessions. So when we conceived of this survey years ago, of course we thought of, well, they can come to campus. But the idea is they can come to campus online as well. With these things, all these, except, well, attend a sporting event, I guess, is a little bit different. But they could do all these things online. Instructors could have online appointments. So the concept, the activity may not change, it's just the mode. But then again, you'll see that they could do that with any Arizona State University or wherever. And the answer is yes. However, you are nearby and you are close and their employers and their families know you, their friends know you. So I still think you have the upper hand.
Yeah, I know a lot of instructors in our partner schools actually even offer virtual office hours, right? And they'll say, hey, I'm just online and available from 3 to 5 or something on Wednesdays and things along those lines. But yeah, I think you hit on a key point there around services. A lot of these services have been forced to go online in the last few months. Thinking about sort of functional things like registration or financial aid or some of these other things. So I think they've proven they can do it at a distance, and it'll be interesting to see if that maintains true, once things open up a little bit more.
Yeah, and may adapt our thinking on asking this question next year a little bit.
Sure, yeah. So let's go ahead to the following slide. Make sure we stay on time here a little bit. We also asked these students, about their connection to the campus. So we talked earlier about the reputation and how it was really important for these students, and we talked about the fact that these students are largely selecting programs that are in their community, right? That are the programs that are close to them, and they're looking for that. And because of all these things, it's unsurprising that a lot of these students feel a connection to campus, right? And they're telling us things like they might be alumni donors for us, and so thinking about development activities students is likely. We also know that they're going to utilize career services, that they're going to, some of these things that, sometimes I think when we build an online program, we don't always think about the impact of these services, and it's something that's really critical to understand. Some of the things that are interesting to me to see here too is that in some ways they want to continue to be your client, right? So a lot of these students have said, I'm eager to maybe take more classes at this school in the future. Or maybe I want to follow up with a certificate, or maybe I want to come back and attend a learning seminar or something along those lines. And I think someone that's already bought into your brand and your product, and they already like your instruction, they like what they got there, this is probably your most likely future student. So we have to think about, do we offer enrichment certificates? Do we have that 60-year curriculum that Professor Hunt at Harvard talks about, where we are engaging with these students over truly a lifelong learning experience, and not just the, maybe 2 to 5 years that we've got them for in more of a traditional degree. So some interesting themes there. Let's go to the next slide.
Can I just mention one thing about the career services?
Yeah, absolutely.
Coming up over and over again, and I think post-COVID, it's even more important. And colleges that can help by acting like maybe a local LinkedIn, because the people you're serving are, community bound, and they're going to be taking jobs in the community. And any way you can find to help them connect by greater relationships with your area employers or with the Chamber of Commerce, or whatever. That's a great promotional topic for you to attract students, I think.
Yeah, that's great. Let's go to the next slide. This all kind of culminates in our third recommendation. It's really under finding ways to connect the online students to campus. So like Carol just mentioned, maybe it's reimagining your career services. Maybe it's understanding that a lot of these career services need to be for the sort of mid-career professional, and not just the early career professional that maybe we tend to target on with our undergrad students. It's finding ways to welcome students to campus. Maybe it's with an orientation session, or maybe a lot of schools are now talking about these hybrid models where students might be able to come to campus for a lecture if they choose to, but do most of their work online. I think we're going to start seeing a lot of the lines start to blend between what a fully online student is and what a fully kind of place-based student might be. Some of those walls, I think, will come down. There's also really simple things that you can do to connect students to the place and the brand. I've seen things out there where maybe an introductory class that a student takes really connects and gives some history to the mission and values of the school. Or maybe it's something simple like sending your student a T-shirt from with your school's logo on it, or giving them access to getting their own student ID. Things like that can really help connect them to campus and can pay dividends through better retention, through kind of long-term engagement, alumni benefit, development, those sorts of things down the road. So Carol, let's go ahead and take us through the next section.
Okay, let's go on. Importance of speed. I think that's no news to you. What does speed mean? Academic credit. The more credit you give me, and particularly for the undergraduate level, of course, that means cost and time. Very, very important. The quickest path to my degree, very, very important. And we've already talked about affordability and reputation, but I hope your transfer credit policies are liberal more than ever, and you can find ways. The latest figures we have is that the preference for many of the students we survey is 12-month, 6 to 8 week courses over the course of the year. We may think everybody wants summer off or January or May, but not true. They'd rather finish in 2.5, 3 years studying 12 months a year with short-term courses, and that gets them quickly to their degree. If you measure the opinions of those who inquire or those who are out in your community, what they've been doing with other institutions, you'll find that quite true. Courses after 8 weeks are just should be non-existent almost in the minds of the user. Next. Where did you complete your most recent online learning? And of course, 70% was at a college or university, and 23% at a place of employment. That's very interesting. Now, I remember the days when we used to talk about contract education, when colleges and universities would approach area employers and say, what unmet training needs you have that we can help you with? And they would bring it to the place of employment. That's a bit, that decreased in appeal when we went primarily online in the 90s and thereafter. At my high school, not very much, somewhere else. So they are online primarily at their college or university, but this does not underestimate number 2, which I think place of employment. I think the idea of taking programs and courses to areas of employment may become more important now than it has been in the recent past. Next. How many pass credit did you earn? I think this is at the undergraduate level only. So when they re-entered undergraduate study online, the median is something like 30, 35 credits. Right. Be very generous and accepting of those credits. But look at 22% at 90. Many of you have stop measures at 60, 70, 80, or 90, and you should reconsider that because they'll go elsewhere if they get a better deal in the acceptance of these credits. Next. A narrow decision window. Well, you all know that if you've talked to your recruiting team. How long did it take you from the time you started your search for an online program to completing your application? Less than 4 weeks is 1/2 of the population. And to be able to respond to that, you've got to have a staff that gets back within minutes, maybe an hour, and you've got to give them the information they need so they can complete their application. Many of them wonder about their financial aid qualifications and things like that. So you need a good individual on the phone that knows the operations of your campus and institution. These coaches that we've been hearing about who, work with applicants and inquirers have all the information at their fingertips so that these individuals, with the help of the staff, can fulfill their applications quickly. In fact, we know the biggest stumbling block is probably transcripts, but there are companies today that for a handful of dollars will get those transcripts for you if you can't do them within a week or two. So you've got to move fast to meet their decision window. Anything else on that, guys? Is there something you want to say?
No, the only other thing I would add is that, just that window of the schools that they're actually engaging with is getting smaller and smaller. A lot of the students are sort of deciding through reading material and stuff, hey, these are the 1 or 2 schools that I'm going to apply to. So yeah, your competition's pretty tough.
Yeah, very much. Okay, next. Hurdles to remove. Number 1, completing financial aid forms. Don't force them to do it on their own. You need a little helping hand there, and you'll get it done faster, and you'll be one of those earlier colleges to meet their expectations. Determining how to pay, money. The third one is money as well, okay? So look at that, 36, 46, almost half of them need services that will help them do the first 3 activities so that they can get those applications done, okay? Completing financial aid forms we hear over and over again. So go back, go to your recruiting people, find out how you're doing these things so that you can speed up your process to be, well, shortly we'll tell you, the 1 or 2 colleges they're going to apply to anyway, and you want to be number 1. Next. So the recommendation number 4, speed all along the way. They're not waiting to make decisions over the long term. They need to make their decision in a narrow window. And you saw what they're considering. Your messaging, your marketing, your brochures, your website, and the ability to help them fulfill their applications and to determine their financial aid will make a world of difference in having you their number 1 choice. Okay, moving on, David, I think you're on.
Yeah, so we tend to ask some forward-looking questions in these reports every year. This year, we're going to focus on talking a little bit about the mobile market. I mentioned this earlier. Let's go to the next slide. We asked students, how much of your program are you completing using a mobile device? So phone, tablet, but not a laptop. And it's really, amazing to see how many of these students are doing even most of their course-related material in these new technologies. I say new technologies, but we've had this iPhone for about a decade now. But 40% of them saying that they do most of their coursework in these technologies for undergrad, similar numbers for the graduate students. Let's go to the next slide, though. And we want to break that down a little bit and say, what are they doing? So unsurprisingly, about half of them are doing their digital readings on their cell phones now. That one, I think a lot of us know, instinctively we understand that they're going to be flipping through. What's surprising to me is seeing all these other activities, these actual graded activities that a quarter of them are doing. 20% of them are doing research, and that's research in the program, not just looking for a degree, but obviously they're looking for a degree. on their cell phones as well. They're doing video learning, and all these things make me think about, 5-7 years ago, we were really proud to say we had a mobile optimized website, right? And our website, maybe we had a mobile version of our website or things along those lines. And really it's changed in the last few years to say, our design is mobile first now in a lot of our websites and landing pages. Like, we understand that's where the search is happening for a lot of these students. We know that from Google data. We know that from looking at our own data. And I think more and more we're going to have to think about the learning environments being mobile first as well, and thinking about how do we make engaging learning activities for these folks using the technology that they've got right in their hands. So let's go to the next slide. So generally, start thinking about these mobile learning options, right? Thinking about the tools and technologies that you have in place. Like, are you using a video product that doesn't load on a cell phone, right? Do you have some sort of submission, process or something for files, that doesn't work through cell device or tablet? Are you using file formats that aren't readable on a tablet? For example, those are things that you can do to do an inventory of your learning platform and understand, how are we addressing students in this way? So let's go to the last slide here. I think Carol's going to give us a little bit of a wrap up.
Yeah, I want to do this as efficiently as we can so that we can get to your questions.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
So let's go to that final slide. And we'll just recap the 5 major points we're making. You need a strategically developed, and I'll define what we mean by that, portfolio of online programs. Strategically developed is to be market sensitive. What is the market demand? That's what's strategic. It's not necessarily what the professors want to offer, okay? What is strategic is to find out what your area potential students within 100, 200 miles want in their online programs, how they want it, when they want it, for how long, and so forth. That's what I think is strategic. And number 2, whatever you do, it's speed at every stage. That is, it's speed at the time they inquire. Hopefully you pick up the phone within 5 minutes and you're responding within 24 hours with information. And it's getting those applications through the process, not letting them sit on the desks of deans for 3 or 4 weeks. Number 3, communicate your value. Remember how important reputation is, where you're connected with the local employers, how your graduates do, what your alumni are up to, and what your faculty has accomplished. Number 4, and connect them to the campus. And I can't emphasize enough how much career services are in demand, particularly now. So that and others, you'd find out if you know strategically what these people want from you in terms of online programs. And of course, we've made a great point about mobile learning options that are imperative. So I think those are the 5 major points. And Andrew, do you have some questions for us?
Sure. Let me just, I think the first one, is either for you, Carol, or David, if you want to chime in as well. But I know earlier on, Carol, you specifically made the point around the distance to the campus where the students reside. And you made the point that if you do have what you called a boutique or niche program, you could consider a wider market than just that 100 miles. Can you say anything more about how distance impacts boutique programs?
Well, it gives you a wider geography, I think. It could be an arts program. It could be like the one I was talking about from the state of Vermont with sustainability. They're programs that the volume is not quite what you need it to be if you stayed within 100 or 200 miles. But if you went to your region, be it Northeast, Southwest, or Northeast, it depends on how visible and well-known you are, or some go nationwide because there are very few. A lot of our Christian colleges, for example, when we do our market analyses of demand, we go nationwide because of the religious affiliation of a group that is nationwide with a particular institution that has the same religious orientation. They're able to attract a much larger market. And that's true of other institutions that have a special, attribute. And it's not only the attribute of the college, but it's the preciseness or the topic at hand being more limited than an MBA, for example.
Yeah, what I'll add to that, just some color, when we looked at things like social work degrees, for example, they were only about 8 to 10% online in 2015. Now they're like 20 to 30% online here in this most recent year of data, right? And so as you think about that, when those programs were a little bit few and far between, we would recruit students from larger and larger radii, but as those more programs become available in the market, that radius shrinks. But Carol brings up a really good point too. I think that doesn't mean necessarily go after a really niche program because you're going to be the only one in the country that offers it. You have to think about balancing with demand too. What are students looking for? Because even if you've got, a program that's really smart and really great for students to take, and if students aren't looking for it, they're going to have trouble finding it.
Right.
So, David, thinking about this OCS 2020 survey that we've been talking about, do you want to speak to any differences you may have seen at the degree level or at the age of the students?
Yeah, this is as much a question I'd probably throw back at you, Andrew, as the lead analyst on it. I think you probably have more insight than I would. But generally speaking, a lot of these trends, I'm surprised how consistent they remain across, some of these foundational questions around like cost and speed being important and some of these things. It's really just interesting to me to see, you ask a different 1,500 people every year and you get really similar responses year over year. It really tells you that there's something foundational here. But yeah, is there anything that you would add about, how maybe business students feel different than engineering students, that kind of thing?
I wouldn't necessarily business versus engineering, but I was just thinking level of student in terms of when we talk about, that iron triangle, those undergraduate students are much more price sensitive. I think we find they are wanting to move a little bit more quicker through that enrollment funnel compared to the graduate students, specifically, the masters, and if we even go up to that doctoral level, really taking their time to weigh those different schools against each other, think about reputation. So of the institution. So I think there is some differences there. And I think age does play a little bit of a role in that as well, with younger students maybe trying to act a little bit more quickly through the funnel compared to an older student.
Yeah,
but as we think about this reputation, I just have a follow-up then there, David and Carol, you can weigh on this as well. When we talk about reputation, what do we really mean? This person is asking, do we mean US News rankings, general word of mouth, or a combination of things? How would we define reputation with our survey?
Yeah, thanks for asking that question. I think that's really helpful. It's in the eye of the student, right? And so we do some other work in this area where we ask students more granular questions like, what did you look at? And largely they do tell us that they do look at ranking sites and put a lot of weight behind those. But they also tell us they ask their employer and they ask friends and they ask respected colleagues and things along those lines. And so the reputation, yes, the rankings are really important, for a lot of students, but I think a lot of them are also using that balance to kind of think about, hey, do I know people that have gone through this program? Are there people that can vouch for it? I think that equally important as well. Carol, any other signals for reputation?
That sums it up really well. I like that response.
Yeah.
So we have a question here around what are we seeing as the types of degrees and certifications that are most in demand? And I just want to add another layer on top of that. Do we think any of these will change over time with the impact of COVID?
Yeah. Well, I want to jump in there. I think definitely the medical fields and the social work fields will jump. And that will have technology has risen strongly in recent years, and I think it will sustain itself. But I think that we're going to, the one thing I was going to mention right before was that we may be seeing a population that is going to become a little bit more interested in certifications and licensure programs because they're changing their careers, their need for new skills. They may not be able to spend years developing those skills. So one thing that we're going to do in the next survey when we talk to these students is to find out what their prospective students are looking for in terms of content, and I think the speed related items won't change very much. They want it as fast as they can. But I do think the topics in the social sciences and the medical fields and IT will grow even more than they are now. What do you think, Dave?
Yeah, I'd echo all that. We did a study recently to look at the effects of the last few recessions on education, and what's happened generally is things like computer science and engineering and technology. They're sort of recession proof. They're up and to the right no matter
Right.
what.
Right.
Healthcare, like you said, is likely to continue to be a real bright spot, and we're expecting to see. We've recently seen some declines in interest around healthcare as the economy's gotten better. But I think that curve is going to kink back up, and we're probably likely to see some increased interest there. Some interesting ones for me are that we're likely to see some short-term gains in things like public administration and education, maybe even criminal justice. But a lot of those are really deeply impacted by the business cycle. So when things are bad, those tend to go up, but then as things get better, those tend to fall off again. So it'll be interesting to see if that remains true of this recession too.
Which really says to our audience, you got to keep abreast of what that area community wants from you and what they're looking for. And it's very important to have a strong connection with that 200-mile radius population.
And just one last quick question, for you, David. Someone was asking about any future surveys that we would look at, specifically at the views of employers and their valuing of online degrees or education in general, especially in this light of COVID.
Yeah, that's great. We actually do have plans to do some surveys. We've done some in the past around the skills gap in the market, and really trying to find the right folks. I think our mindset has pivoted a little bit. We're about to enter into a market where, unfortunately, there's a lot of unemployment. So for a lot of folks, maybe it's easier to find top tier talent in the near term. But I think one of the questions that'll remain consistent throughout is just that one about what are kind of responses to online learning. Also, what are companies' plans around online learning? Carol mentioned this earlier. We partner with employers to kind of help them come to the universities and find synergies where they can skin programs to kind of match case studies at their organization, that sort of thing, so where there's some opportunities to really find some new synergies between employers and educators, and we think there's a lot of opportunity in that market in particular moving forward.
That rings a little bell for me, Dave, in terms of this old term we once had called contract education. I think, and then it dipped down, and now we don't see very much of it. But it seems to me that since most employers are going to conserve on price, yet they need to advance the skills of their workforce, again, there may be an opportunity for colleges to put their foot through the door, not only to bring those training and education services into the company site, but also to offer their programs there. That was very popular, decades ago. It might be that their money is as on a shortage now.
Yeah, it's a great point, Carol. We've actually done a lot of investment over the last few years to build those links up between employers and institutions, and so we've got boots on the ground that develop those relationships. And you can imagine in hospital systems or telecom companies or banks and things along those lines. And whether it's a boot camp at the Software Guild or maybe even thinking about your educators and the continuing education units they might be taking at advancement courses, we try to meet those needs and kind of bring those things together. Because candidly, that's part of the affordability question too, right? If I can get a more affordable program through my employer or through a relationship that my employer has, then that's what students are going to pay.
It could be a major revival. I'll end my story with a funny note. I remember it was prior to 2000 when I wrote a paper on contract education while I was at the College Board, and the editor called me and she said, "I've never heard that term before. Should we hyphenate it?" So we may be back at that stage where it became very popular in the 90s and the early 2000s, and now it might be even more so because employers will need our training services since they're going to be more limited on resources.
Sure.
Thank you, David and Carol. Go ahead, Shandy.
Yeah, thank you very much for this really enlightening discussion and all of your insights. And thank you to everybody who has joined us today. I hope you found the strategies we shared valuable as you continue to grow and enhance your programs during this time. As a reminder, for those still on, you will be receiving a recording of today's presentation by the end of the week. We will also try to respond to any other questions we didn't get to in the Q&A, as there were several. In the meantime, additional questions you have can be sent to us at edservices@wiley.com. You can also download the full report at edservices.wiley.com/OCS2020, or continue to ask questions on Twitter using #OCSReport2020. Today's webinar was hosted by Wiley Education Services. To learn more about our services and solutions, please visit us at edservices.wiley.com. And other than that, thank you again and have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye, everybody.
Bye.